Imagine you are imprisoned for 99 years in one of the most dangerous prisons, where escaping is nearly impossible. There are high walls with electric wires, guard towers, and it is classified as one of the strongest prisons in America. Would you accept this reality, or would you be crazy like the hero of our story and attempt the impossible, executing multiple escape plans, each one more complicated than the last? Hello, welcome to the channel. Before we start the video, I kindly ask you to support the channel by liking and subscribing. Watch the video until the end, and let's try to get this video to 1,000 likes. Broughton Mountain Prison in Tennessee is one of the maximum security prisons in America, established in 1896. This place is heavily guarded, and for most prisoners, it is a one-way ticket. It is dubbed the end of the line because escaping from it is considered impossible. At any moment, you could be killed by other inmates as well. Additionally, the prison's location is at the end of a valley, meaning it is very far from the city. Anyone who enters feels isolated from the world. The escape process, no matter how skilled or criminal a prisoner is, having spent their life in and out of prisons, is nearly impossible. However, there was one inmate who decided to prove otherwise and escape from this prison in a clever way. His name was James Earl Ray, born on March 10, 1927. He had a history filled with theft, murder, and prison escapes, and he was one of the most notorious killers in America. The reason for this notoriety is that on April 4, 1968, he assassinated Martin Luther King Jr., a leader in the civil rights movement in America, known for his contributions against racism and social injustice. According to reports, James was racist, which is why he killed him. However, initially, James did not disclose the reason for the assassination, claiming that he was pressured by groups to carry out the act. After the assassination, James was captured in 1970 and sentenced to 99 years in prison, and he was, of course, sent to Broughton Mountain Prison, as we mentioned. As I told you, James had a long history of crime and escape attempts. 3 years before the assassination of Martin Luther King, he escaped from a prison in Missouri. The escape plan was quite imaginative at that time. He had been imprisoned on armed robbery charges and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. During this time, he worked in the bakery that was part of the prison where he was held. He noticed that every day a truck would arrive to take the bread they made to other prisons. He and another inmate wondered how he could escape using that truck. After planning carefully, he decided to hide inside one of the cardboard boxes that they used to pack the bread. He actually got inside the box and had his fellow inmates place bread on top of him so that no one would notice he was there. There were many such boxes, so no one could see him. After that, the truck headed to another prison. When it stopped suddenly, he jumped out and hid in a junkyard, then escaped from the area. He remained on the run without anyone catching him until he carried out the assassination of Martin Luther King. After the assassination, he was arrested at Heathrow Airport in London and was returned to the United States. They then sent him to Broughton Mountain Prison, which we mentioned at the beginning of the story. Of course, after he was imprisoned, what occupied his mind the most was escaping from prison. Here, James was trying to stay as far away as possible from the eyes of the guards and the other inmates. He didn't like to reveal himself to anyone. He preferred to remain mysterious all the time. Despite this, the guards were initially strict with him because he had experience with escape attempts. But how could he think about escaping from this impregnable fortress, a prison resembling an isolated castle designed to make every escape dream impossible? The prison walls were 5 meters high and 1 meter thick, and not only that, but there were also barbed wires at the top of the walls. These wires were electrified with a voltage of 20,000 volts, meaning that anyone who touched them would be done for. This effectively discouraged all inmates from considering escape. In addition to the barbed wires, there were 9 guard towers surrounding the prison, and each tower had an armed guard ready to shoot anyone attempting to escape. So, when James Earl saw all these obstacles, he was sure that the best way to escape was underground. Since 1970, while he was in his cell, he started examining everything: walls, ceiling, and floor, trying to find any weak point that he could use to escape. The first idea that came to his mind was to cut the bars and escape through the corridor somehow, but he quickly dismissed this idea as somewhat foolish. As for this prison, he then turned his attention to the air vent in his cell. The vent was located at the bottom, behind the bed, and it was small, barely large enough for a person to fit through. It had a protective mesh secured by 4 screws. When James removed the mesh, he discovered that he could dig into the wall using a spoon or any metal piece. His goal was to enter this vent to find out where it would lead him. Every night, after the inmates were counted, he would remove the mesh and dig a little so that no one would notice what he was doing in the cell. Of course, it was crucial that there were no guards outside checking on the inmates. Most of the time, he was alone in the cell, but occasionally he would have a random cellmate, so he made sure not to tell anyone about his plan. After several weeks of digging, he managed to enter the vent. Here, he discovered a pipe passage designed for ventilating the cells in the prison, which pulled air from all the cells and ended with a huge fan that expelled the air outside the prison. The passages were spacious enough for a person to crawl through easily. James was amazed. This was the best way he could use to escape from the prison. He managed to bypass the huge fan and the bars in front of it, which led him out to the prison yard. Because this fan led directly to the outside yard, he didn't understand what the next step would be. Let's assume he successfully reached the yard. What would he do next? The guards in the towers would definitely see him. The next day, when he went to the yard, he noticed a hole in the ground. Upon examining the area closely, he remembered that there was a power generation station nearby. As we mentioned, the prison was in a remote area, and generating electricity there was essential. He realized immediately that the hole in the ground led to the station. He thought that if he entered it, after getting past the huge fan, which was 6 meters away, it would surely take him directly to the station through a steam pipe that extended from the prison to the station. If he reached there, he would definitely be able to escape easily. Some of you might not have understood the idea, so let's summarize it quickly. James would enter through the vent in his cell. His first obstacle would be the pipes in front of the fan, which he would have to cut through to cross and exit to the yard. He would need a hacksaw for this, but where would he get one? It was impossible to sneak something like that from outside without being discovered. However, James used a very clever method. He asked his brother, who was outside the prison, for help to smuggle him a saw. His brother's name was Jerry, and Jerry said he had a plan. So he cut the bottom of his shoe and hid a small hacksaw blade inside so that it wouldn't be discovered. Then he glued the shoe back together and went for a visit with his brother in prison. During this time, the shoes he was wearing were identical to his brother's, same color and size. As soon as the guard moved away, they quickly exchanged shoes as if nothing had happened. After the visit ended, James went back to his cell, took out the blade, and began the process of cutting the bars to escape. Of course, this process was not easy at all. It took him several months to finish. Unfortunately, this was not the end of his obstacles. He faced an even bigger problem than cutting the bars, which was the second set of bars at the fan. He couldn't crawl under the fan to get to the other side, and there were more bars that needed to be cut. He had no tools for this, so to overcome this problem, he had to enlist the help of someone else, but this time it wasn't his brother, it was one of his few friends in prison. The person he enlisted was named Jake Morlock. Keep in mind that we don't have actual pictures of Jake or any of the people we will mention later, so all the images you see will be of actors. Jake was the person James trusted the most in prison. Since he was a trustworthy person, James confided in him about his escape plan. Jake was excited and liked the idea, but with one condition: he wanted to escape with James. James agreed without any problem. The reason James sought Jake's help was that he was a plumber in the prison workshop and had access to the tools James would need. They planned to use the necessary equipment, and James would go down to cut the fan bars and continue the escape. However, another problem they faced was that Jake lived in a cell, and if any guard discovered him, he would be punished. Fortunately, that day was a holiday, and the number of guards was less than usual, so he was able to switch places without anyone noticing. When Jake came to see him that evening, he gave James a key to the pipes and promised him other things. It's unclear how he managed to sneak them out of the maintenance workshop, but since he was fixing things for the inmates, he had the ability to get them out unnoticed. After the guards finished the evening count, the two partners began their escape. James entered and cut through the fan, managing to reach the prison yard. However, he didn't continue. He turned around and returned to his cell. A few days earlier, he had prepared some toilet paper to make it look like he and his friend were lying in their beds so that after they entered the vent, the guards wouldn't notice they were missing. The paper was shaped like human heads, and he placed it under the blankets before slipping out through the vent. This is when he encountered a significant problem. Due to Jake's weight, it was nearly impossible for him to enter through the vent. James could barely fit, so there was no option but for him to escape alone. He was supposed to be gone from the place before the morning count at 6 a.m. At around 2:45 a.m., he was coming out of the vent, and at that time, he had previously planned with his brother Jerry that after his exit on the specified day, Jerry would be waiting for him at a designated parking lot to pick him up and help him escape. And indeed, Jerry was ready and waiting anxiously on the other side. James managed to exit the vent and headed towards the opening he was supposed to descend through. But here, he realized that the operation was extremely risky. The guards in the towers were constantly monitoring the area, and if they spotted him, all his efforts would be in vain, and he might even be killed. However, he kept watching the situation until the moment was right. He lifted the cover of the opening to descend below, but he was shocked by the amount of steam that was pouring out. The temperature down there was literally unbearable. The pain he felt at first was excruciating, and within seconds, he had to decide whether to enter and endure the horrific heat and risk burns, or to turn back and forget about the escape. Of course, he decided to go down and endure all the pain, as everything was worth it for the sake of freedom. After he went down, he suffered severe burns that were much worse than expected, to the point that he couldn't resist and decided to return. But the bigger disaster was that after he came out of the opening, one of the guards noticed him, and they immediately arrested him. They discovered everything he had done, including the opening he made in the cell and the blood he had shed. The fan was turned on, and all his efforts were in vain, and they sent him back to a more secure cell. I don't know what happened regarding his friend Jake, it wasn't mentioned. As for his brother Jerry, after waiting for several hours, he was sure something had happened to his brother, which made him cancel the operation. Suddenly, while he was returning, he heard on the radio that inmate James Ray had been arrested while trying to escape from Broughton Mountain Prison. Before James was sent to another cell, they sent him to the prison's medical unit to treat the burns he had suffered. The burns were second and third degree, and third-degree burns are considered very dangerous and can destroy layers of skin. After he was treated, he spent 5 years in prison without making any attempt to escape because he didn't see any suitable way to do so. During this time, in 1976, he was working in the prison laundry, where the inmates' clothes were washed. One day, while he was working, he found pipes about a meter long thrown in a corner of the laundry, so he started collecting them and hiding them behind the laundry without anyone noticing. Here you might wonder what James wanted with these pipes. As clever as he was just as cunning. He collected these pipes in hopes of using them when the opportunity to escape arose. After 3 years, one day while walking in the prison yard, he noticed something strange in one of the corners of the prison wall, a gap about 50 centimeters long between the wall and the barbed wire at the top. This gap was enough for a person to slip through and escape into the valley without being electrocuted. It was amazing that he managed to climb this wall. He was excited because he could escape easily. But how could he accomplish this? And how would the guards in the towers not notice him? We'll learn this point as the story unfolds. When James contemplated this, he remembered the pipes he had collected in the prison laundry and wondered if he could make a ladder out of them to climb the wall. It was a brilliant idea, but the amount of pipes he had was not enough. He needed to involve some people in this operation to gather the pipes and build the ladder so they could all escape together because, in the end, one hand alone doesn't clap. The first person he brought in was an inmate named Dodge Shelton. This man, like James, had a history of escape attempts. His job in this prison was a plumber, the same job as our friend Jake we talked about earlier. However, Doug was responsible for plumbing and had access to various tools they would need for their operation. Being experienced in this field, he knew how to assemble the pieces to create the ladder, and due to his job, he had some privileges regarding the movement of tools. The second person James added to their group was an inmate named Earl Hill. Earl was his cellmate and didn't have a specific job. He would help them with anything he could. James didn't choose these inmates randomly. He selected them from among all the prisoners because he knew they were trustworthy and wouldn't betray him. Some inmates would inform the authorities if they learned that someone was planning an escape, hoping to receive rewards or a reduction in their sentences. But these two weren't like that. After the trio agreed on all the details of the plan, they began to slowly steal pipe pieces from everywhere. They later hid them in a small hole in the ground at the back of the yard where no one went, and it wouldn't be visible from afar. They covered everything with leaves so that if anyone found it, they wouldn't notice the hiding spot. The route for smuggling the pipes outside was difficult and very tiring. If any guard discovered them, their plan would fail. Sometimes they would hide the pieces in their clothes and avoid the guards while exiting to the yard, or two of them would distract the guards while one snuck a piece outside. At the same time, they were aware of the guards' routines and knew when they would let the inmates out for breaks and when they wouldn't. In a way, they were successful in this. During this time, they were monitoring the guard in the nearest tower to the gap they planned to jump through. They tried to study his behavior and how he watched over the yard while they were outside. They discovered he was the easiest guard among all the tower guards because he had a certain routine when the inmates were taken out for a break. He would start reading a newspaper and wouldn't stop until he finished it all. Of course, since his job was boring and routine, he looked for anything to entertain himself with, and reading was the best option at that time. James needed to gather money to bribe some inmates and collect information, such as insider knowledge about the guards or their routines. So, he started charging some inmates a monthly fee to wash their clothes in the prison laundry, offering them VIP treatment. Later, he asked for help from his brother Jerry. Once again, he would sometimes receive visits in prison, and James would give him some details about his plan, or he would write him coded messages in a way that only they could understand and send them through the mail. On May 17, 1977, he wrote him a message saying that he needed to bury a bag in a specific location near the prison to use after the escape operation. Jerry followed the instructions and buried the bag, placing inside it hair dye, a coat, food supplies, first aid materials, and a gun, everything he might need after the escape. On June 9, 1977, before the escape operation, James, Dodge, and Earl gathered for the last time in the prison yard and decided they had enough pipe pieces to build the ladder and were ready to escape. At 6 p.m. on Friday, June 10, 1977, the inmates were let out to exercise, and during this time, the escape operation officially began. The first thing James did was bribe one of the inmates to create a fake fight between him and other inmates in a location far from the escape spot, distracting the guards so they could assemble the ladder and escape. Indeed, he gave a secret signal, and the fight started among the inmates. The guards began to rush over. Fortunately for James, there were only 3 or 4 guards in the yard at that moment, and none of the guards were in the towers. When the fight started, James, Dodge, and Earl quickly assembled the ladder and lifted James to lean against the wall. But then, a disaster happened that could ruin everything they had worked for. When James lifted the ladder, it accidentally made contact with the electrical wires above. Since the ladder was made of metal, James received a mild electric shock, causing him to faint for a few seconds. Dodge and Earl tried to wake him, giving him a few slaps until he came to his senses and managed to stand again. He climbed the ladder and escaped into the valley, and of course, Dodge and Earl jumped right after him, leaving the ladder behind. Now, some might say, "Come on, Jack, are you kidding us? Didn't the guard in the nearby tower see them putting up the ladder and climbing it?" The amazing thing is that despite the 3 of them escaping and the fight happening among the inmates below, the guard was in another world. He was holding the newspaper and reading, completely uninterested in what was going on. This highlights the level of negligence among the guards in this prison, and the guards in the other towers didn't notice the escaping inmates at all. After the 3 of them escaped, within seconds, some other inmates noticed the ladder they had set up and ran toward it to take advantage of the opportunity as well. The nearby guard still didn't see them. Besides James, Dodge, and Earl, 3 more inmates managed to escape in the same way. There was also an inmate working in the prison kitchen who ran to escape too, but because he was wearing white, one of the guards noticed him. When he saw him climbing the ladder, he aimed his weapon at him and shot him, killing him. Just then, after the 3rd or 4th shot was fired, the drowsy guard noticed that something was wrong around him. But by then, the escaping inmates had vanished from the area. Half an hour after the escape, the 6 fugitives were running through the rugged mountains, hoping to reach a residential area. They managed to escape, and of course, when the guards at the prison counted the inmates, they realized that 6 had escaped. They locked down the prison and began a massive manhunt, helicopters, FBI agents, police dogs, and patrols everywhere. They left no place unchecked. It was one of the most famous manhunts in America, but James was in big trouble. After the 6 escaped, they separated, and he was left alone. He was trying to find the bag his brother Jerry had buried, the one we mentioned that contained the gun and supplies. The problem was that he couldn't find it and didn't know where his brother buried it, so he had to escape randomly through the woods. The issue was that he couldn't find any food or water at all, and he didn't even know where he was headed. Within 48 hours, the other 5 inmates were captured and returned to prison. The FBI, police, and soldiers, along with their dogs, were searching everywhere possible. After 51 hours of the escape, one of the dogs suddenly picked up a scent and tracked it to James. When they followed the scent, they found him buried under a pile of leaves, and he surrendered immediately without any resistance. The tragedy was that he was only 6 miles away from a highway, meaning he was going in the wrong direction. If he had reached there, he might have found a way to escape using a car or some other means. Unfortunately, after this crazy escape attempt, he was returned to the same prison he had escaped from and remained incarcerated until he died on April 23, 1998. As for Broughton Mountain Prison, it remained operational until 2009, after which it was closed and turned into a tourist site. What do you think? Was James a smart escapee, or could he have used different tactics to make his escape successful? Let me know in the comments. And with that, we reach the end of our story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.